Welcome, I'm John, and today I'm going to tell you an exciting story. The cleaning lady was treated like trash until a millionaire walked in and changed everything. Maggie Brooks was only 32, but her eyes looked older. The fluorescent lights of the Lexington Grand Hotel hummed above her as she pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway, its wheels squeaking against the polished marble floor. It was nearly midnight, and the hotel had settled into that particular kind of quiet that only expensive places knew. A silence bought and paid for, insulated by thick walls and thicker wallets. She moved mechanically through her routine, her hands working on autopilot, wiped down the mahogany tables, straightened the velvet cushions, polished the brass fixtures until they gleamed. This was her world now, touching luxury she would never own, cleaning up after lives she would never live. 2 years ago, everything had been different. 2 years ago, she'd had Ryan. They'd been saving for a baby, talking about paint colors for the nursery, arguing playfully over names. He'd worked overtime at the construction site, coming home exhausted but happy, always with that crooked smile that made her forget about their cramped apartment and tight budget. They'd had plans, dreams, a future that felt solid and real. Then came that Tuesday night in October. Ryan had been driving home, late as usual. The drunk driver ran the red light at the intersection of Queens Boulevard and 58th Street. Ryan's truck had crumpled like paper. He died before the ambulance arrived. Maggie received the call at 2:37 a.m. when she still remembered checking the clock, as if the time mattered, as if knowing the exact moment would somehow make it more real. The officer's voice had been calm, almost robotic, delivering the worst news of her life like he was reading a weather report. The world had gone silent after that. She'd spiraled for months. The bills stacked up faster than she could count them. Medical debt from Ryan's final ambulance ride, a ride he hadn't even been conscious for. Funeral costs, the mortgage they could no longer afford. Her teaching job at the community art center had felt impossible to maintain while drowning in grief. Eventually, she'd let it go, let everything go. The house sold for less than they owed. Her dreams were boxed up and stored in her sister's garage in New Jersey. She moved into a tiny studio in Queens, a place so small she could touch both walls if she stood in the center and stretched out her arms. The Lexington Grand Hotel had been hiring. The pay was barely enough, but it covered rent, and most nights, the quiet gave her space to grieve without anyone watching. Tonight, she was assigned to the executive lounge on the 15th floor, a space reserved for the hotel's wealthiest guests. Crystal chandeliers, imported Italian leather sofas, a view of Manhattan that probably cost more per night than she made in a month. Maggie worked carefully, dusting the shelves lined with expensive whiskey bottles she'd never taste. As she reached for a stray glass someone had left on the edge of the marble counter, her elbow caught the handle of her cart. The glass tumbled. It seemed to fall in slow motion, catching the light as it spun through the air before shattering against the floor with a sound that felt deafening in the silent room. Maggie's heart seized. She dropped to her knees immediately, her hands shaking as she began collecting the sharp, glittering pieces. Of course. The voice was cold, sharp as the broken glass. Mrs. Carrington, the front desk manager, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. Her tailored suit was impeccable, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. "The maid breaks something," Carrington continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "What a surprise." Maggie's face flushed hot. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carrington. You're always sorry," Carrington snapped, stepping closer. "Maybe if you spent more time doing your job and less time daydreaming about whatever tragedy you're wallowing in, this wouldn't happen." The words hit like physical blows. Maggie kept her eyes down, focusing on the glass, on not cutting herself, on not crying, not here, not in front of her. "Some people," Carrington continued, "simply aren't cut out for this level of service. Perhaps you should consider—" "That's enough." The voice was deep, firm, and came from behind Carrington. Both women turned. A man stepped into the lounge, and Maggie's breath caught despite herself. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with the kind of presence that didn't demand attention so much as naturally commanded it. His charcoal gray suit fit him perfectly, clearly custom-made, and his dark hair was slightly disheveled in a way that suggested he'd been working late. But it was his eyes that struck Maggie first, deep brown, intelligent, and carrying a weariness that seemed oddly familiar. Ethan Caldwell had checked into the penthouse suite the night before. Maggie had heard the other housekeepers whispering about him in the break room, a tech CEO, founder of some startup recently valued at hundreds of millions, young, self-made, staying alone without the usual entourage of assistance and security that typically accompanied the ultra-wealthy. "Excuse me, sir," Mrs. Carrington started, her tone immediately shifting to something syrupy and deferential. "I was just addressing a situation with our staff. There's no need for you to concern yourself. I said that's enough." Ethan's voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority. He stepped fully into the room, his gaze fixed on Carrington. "You don't talk to people like that. Not in front of me. Not ever." Carrington's mouth opened, then closed. Her face flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and barely contained anger. "Mr. Caldwell, I assure you we maintain very high standards here at the Lexington Grand, and when those standards aren't met, the standard I care about right now is basic human decency," Ethan interrupted. "And from what I just witnessed, you failed that one spectacularly." The silence that followed was suffocating. Maggie remained kneeling on the floor, a piece of broken glass still clutched in her trembling hand, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. She'd never seen anyone speak to Mrs. Carrington like that. No one dared. Carrington's jaw tightened. She glanced at Maggie with undisguised contempt, then back at Ethan. "Of course, Mr. Caldwell. My apologies if I seemed harsh. I'll leave you to your evening." She turned on her heel and walked out, her footsteps sharp and deliberate against the marble floor. The moment she disappeared, the tension in the room shifted. Maggie finally exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. She looked down at the glass in her palm, suddenly aware of how close she'd come to cutting herself. "You okay?" Ethan's voice was gentler now, concerned. He moved closer, crouching down beside her with an ease that surprised her. Most of the wealthy guests barely acknowledged the housekeeping staff's existence, let alone got down on the floor with them. Maggie nodded quickly, not trusting her voice. She carefully placed the shard into the small trash bag she'd pulled from her cart. "Hey," he said softly. "Really? Are you all right?" She blinked back the tears that had been threatening to fall since Carrington's verbal assault. "Yes, thank you, I'm fine." "That looked pretty awful," Ethan said, helping her collect some of the smaller pieces. "And I'm not talking about the glass." Maggie let out a broken laugh, immediately regretting how vulnerable it sounded. "I'm used to it. I mean, it's part of the job. It shouldn't be." His tone was firm again, but not harsh. "No job should require you to accept being treated like that." She finally met his eyes, surprised by the genuine concern she found there. In 2 years of working at the Lexington Grand, no guest had ever looked at her like this, like she was actually a person, not just part of the furniture. "I'm Ethan," he said, standing and offering his hand to help her up. She hesitated for just a moment before taking it. His grip was warm, steady. "Maggie." "Nice to meet you, Maggie." He released her hand but didn't step back, didn't retreat into the comfortable distance most wealthy guests maintained. "Though I wish it were under better circumstances." She brushed off her uniform, acutely aware of how she must look, exhausted, disheveled, her face still flushed from humiliation. "I should finish cleaning this up. I'm sorry you had to witness that." "You're apologizing to me." Ethan shook his head, a slight smile playing at his lips. "For the record, I think that glass had it coming. It was sitting way too close to the edge anyway." The comment was so unexpected, so absurd, that Maggie laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. Not since Ryan. "There we go," Ethan said, his smile widening. "That's better." For a moment, they just stood there, and Maggie felt something strange stirring in her chest. Not attraction exactly, or at least not just attraction. It was more like recognition, like somehow this stranger in his expensive suit understood what it felt like to be broken. "I should let you get back to work," Ethan said, though he seemed reluctant to leave. "But Maggie, don't let people like her make you forget your worth." Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing down the hallway toward the elevator bank. Maggie stood alone in the executive lounge, surrounded by luxury and broken glass, her hand still warm from where he'd held it. The next morning, Maggie arrived at the hotel with Ethan Caldwell still on her mind, though she tried to push the thought away. Men like him didn't notice women like her. Not really. Last night had been an anomaly, a moment of kindness from someone passing through her life like a guest checking out of a hotel room. She'd learned long ago not to hold on to moments that weren't meant to last. She clocked in at 6:47 a.m., 3 minutes before her shift officially started. Punctuality was one of the few things she could control, and Mrs. Carrington watched for any infraction like a hawk circling prey. "Morning, Maggie," said Rosa, one of the other housekeepers, as they gathered their supply carts from the storage room. Rosa was in her 50s, a grandmother from the Dominican Republic who'd worked at the Lexington Grand for nearly 2 decades. She was one of the few people who'd shown Maggie genuine kindness when she'd started. "You look tired, mija." "Rough night." "Something like that," Maggie replied, not wanting to relive the humiliation from the executive lounge. News traveled fast among the staff, and she was certain everyone had already heard about the broken glass and Mrs. Carrington's tirade. Rosa squeezed her shoulder knowingly. "Don't let that bruja get to you. She treats everyone like dirt. It says more about her than about you." Maggie managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Rosa." Her assignment for the day included the 14th and 15th floors, luxury suites and penthouses. As she pushed her cart toward the elevator, her stomach tightened with anxiety. The penthouse suite was on 15, Ethan Caldwell's suite. She told herself it didn't matter. He was probably already out, attending important meetings, doing whatever billionaire tech CEOs did with their days. She'd clean his room, change his sheets, and never see him again. That's how it always worked. The elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, revealing the plush, carpeted hallway with its expensive artwork and subtle lighting. Maggie began with the rooms furthest from the penthouse, working her way methodically through each suite. She moved efficiently, making beds with hospital corners, scrubbing bathrooms until they sparkled, replacing towels and toiletries. By 10:30, she'd reached the penthouse. She knocked firmly 3 times, the standard protocol. "Housekeeping." No answer. She waited the required 30 seconds, then knocked again. "Housekeeping." Still nothing. Using her master key card, Maggie opened the door and stepped inside, calling out once more to be safe. The suite was enormous, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, a full kitchen, a living area larger than her entire studio apartment. But what caught her attention wasn't the luxury. It was the chaos. The massive dining table was covered with laptops, tablets, legal pads filled with sketches and notes, coffee cups in various stages of emptiness. A whiteboard on wheels had been pulled into the room, covered with diagrams and equations that might as well have been written in another language. This wasn't the sterile, untouched environment she usually encountered in the penthouse suites. Someone actually lived here, worked here. "Oh, don't worry about that mess." Maggie jumped, her hand flying to her chest. Ethan emerged from the bedroom, wearing jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, his hair still damp from a shower. He looked younger like this, more approachable, though the dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much. "I'm so sorry," Maggie stammered. "I knocked. I didn't think anyone was here." "No, it's my fault. I was on a call in the bedroom." He ran a hand through his hair, looking almost embarrassed. "I'm not used to having housekeeping. Usually, I just tell them to skip my room. I can come back later if—" "Actually," Ethan interrupted, moving toward the kitchen area. "I'm glad you're here. I was about to go down to get coffee, but the machine in here has defeated me." He gestured at the high-end espresso maker built into the counter. "Any chance you know how to work one of these?" Maggie hesitated. This felt like crossing some invisible line, moving beyond the standard guest housekeeper dynamic, but something in his expression, a mix of genuine helplessness and self-deprecating humor, made her step forward. "I think I can manage that," she said. She approached the machine, grateful for the countless times she'd made coffee for guests in the executive lounge. Her hands moved confidently through the process, and within minutes, the rich aroma of espresso filled the suite. "You're a lifesaver," Ethan said as she handed him the cup. "I've been running on maybe 3 hours of sleep and whatever passes for coffee from the bodega on the corner." "Why not just call room service?" Maggie asked, then immediately regretted the question. It wasn't her place to ask, but Ethan didn't seem bothered, because then I'd have to stop working to answer the door, make small talk, tip appropriately. He took a sip of the espresso and closed his eyes appreciatively. "This is perfect. Thank you." "You're welcome." Maggie moved back toward her cart. "I should let you work. I'll just—" "Maggie." His voice stopped her. "Would you mind if I asked you something?" She turned back, uncertain. "Okay. Last night, after that manager left, you said you were used to being treated like that." His expression was serious now. "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 2 years. And is it always like that?" Maggie thought about lying, about giving him the safe answer. But something about the way he looked at her, really looked at her, made the truth spill out. Most days, she admitted quietly. "But I need this job." Ethan set his coffee cup down on the counter, his expression darkening. "That's not right." Maggie shifted uncomfortably, suddenly wishing she'd kept her mouth shut. The last thing she needed was for a guest, even a well-meaning one, to make waves that would eventually crash back on her. "It's fine, really. I shouldn't have said anything." "Why not?" He leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed, but his eyes intent. "Why shouldn't you say something when you're being mistreated? Because people like me don't get to complain," Maggie said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "We just do our jobs and hope we still have them tomorrow." The silence that followed felt heavy. Maggie immediately regretted her tone, already imagining Mrs. Carrington's face when she inevitably found out that the maid had been rude to the penthouse guest. But Ethan didn't look offended. If anything, he looked sad. "People like you," he repeated slowly. "What does that mean?" Maggie gestured at her uniform, at her cart, at the vast distance between their worlds. "Mr. Caldwell." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "Ethan," she amended, though the informality felt strange on her tongue. "You're staying in a penthouse that costs more per night than I make in a month. We're not living in the same world." "Maybe not," he acknowledged. But we're both human beings standing in the same room, having a conversation. That counts for something." She wanted to argue, to explain how naive that sounded, how the world didn't actually work that way. But there was something in his eyes, a sincerity that seemed rare among the wealthy guests she encountered, that made her pause. "I should really let you work," Maggie said finally, reaching for her cart. "Wait." Ethan moved around the counter but maintained a respectful distance. "Can I ask you one more thing? And you can tell me it's none of my business." Maggie tensed. "Okay. Last night, that manager said something about you daydreaming, about tragedy." His voice was careful, gentle. "I'm not trying to pry, but are you okay? I mean, beyond the job stuff." The question shouldn't have affected her the way it did. People asked, "How are you?" all the time. Guests, co-workers, her sister during their weekly phone calls. But they didn't really want to know. It was just politeness, social lubrication, words without weight. But the way Ethan asked, with genuine concern, actually waiting for an answer, cracked something inside her. "I lost my husband 2 years ago," she heard herself say. The words came out flat, rehearsed from repetition. "Drunk driver." He died instantly. Ethan's expression shifted, pain flickering across his features. "God, Maggie, I'm so sorry." "Thank you." She swallowed hard, fighting the emotion that always lurked just beneath the surface. "I'm managing. Some days are harder than others." "I can't imagine." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "My mother died when I was 16. Cancer. It's not the same as losing a spouse, but I remember that feeling of the world just continuing, like it should have stopped, but it didn't." Maggie looked up at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his admission. Yes, exactly that. They stood there in the morning light streaming through the penthouse windows, two people connected by the universal language of loss. The city hummed beyond the glass, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, everyone carrying their own invisible weight. "Did you have anyone?" Ethan asked. "Family? Friends?" "My sister. She helped a lot." Maggie tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But everyone expects you to move on after a certain point. Get back to normal. Except there is no normal anymore. There's just this." Ethan nodded slowly. "What did you do before all this? I mean, before you were working here?" The question caught her off guard. Most people didn't ask about her life before. "I taught art classes at a community center in Queens. Painting, drawing, basic design. I loved it." "Why'd you stop?" "Because grief doesn't pay bills," Maggie said simply. "And teaching part-time at a community center barely did either. After Ryan died, I had medical debt, funeral costs, a mortgage I couldn't afford alone. I had to make practical choices." "So you gave up something you loved." "I survived," she corrected. "That's what you do." Ethan walked over to the windows, looking out at Central Park stretched below. "Do you still paint? Draw? Anything?" "No." The word came out harder than she intended. "I haven't picked up a brush since the funeral. I can't seem to. I don't know. It feels like that part of me died with him. Or maybe it's just sleeping," Ethan suggested quietly, waiting for the right moment to wake up. Maggie wanted to tell him he was wrong, that some things stayed broken, that you couldn't just will yourself back into being the person you used to be. But something in his voice made her wonder if he was speaking from experience. "I really should start cleaning," she said, her professional instincts finally overriding the strange intimacy of the conversation. "You have a lot of work to do, and I'm already behind schedule." Ethan turned from the window. "Right, of course. He gestured vaguely toward his laptop-covered table. "I'll be over here trying to pretend I understand what I'm doing." Over the next week, Maggie found herself running into Ethan with increasing frequency. At first, she told herself it was coincidence. The hotel was only so big, and her cleaning route naturally brought her to the 15th floor. But after the third accidental encounter in the hallway, and the fourth time he happened to be grabbing coffee from the lobby cafe exactly when her morning break started, she began to suspect otherwise. He never made a big production of it, just a friendly hello, a question about how her shift was going, sometimes a joke that made her forget, for just a moment, the weight she carried everywhere. He had a way of making conversation feel effortless, like they were old friends catching up rather than a billionaire and a housekeeper bridging an impossible divide. On Wednesday morning, Maggie was taking her 15-minute break in the small courtyard behind the hotel, a hidden space where staff could escape the watchful eyes of management. She sat on the stone bench, eating a granola bar and staring at nothing in particular, when Ethan appeared carrying 2 paper cups. "Thought you might want some real coffee," he said, offering her one. "The stuff in the break room looks like it could strip paint." Maggie hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." He sat down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Is it okay if I join you? Or would you rather have the silence?" She should have said she preferred the silence, should have maintained the boundaries that kept her world separate and safe. Instead, she heard herself say, "You can stay." They sat quietly for a moment, sipping their coffee. It was good, much better than the sludge from the staff room. Maggie could taste hints of caramel and vanilla, the kind of drink that cost more than her lunch. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said finally. "And you can tell me to mind my own business." "You seem to ask that a lot," Maggie observed, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "When I've been told I have boundary issues." He grinned. "Rich people aren't used to being told no, so I try to give people an out." "What do you want to know?" "The art classes you taught," he said. "What kind of art did you focus on?" The question surprised her. Most people, when they learned about her teaching background, offered vague platitudes and quickly changed the subject, mostly painting, watercolors, acrylics. "I loved teaching beginners, people who thought they couldn't draw a straight line. There's something magical about watching someone realize they're capable of creating beauty." "You light up when you talk about it," Ethan observed. "Your whole face changes." Maggie felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't know about that." "I do." He took another sip of coffee. "My company, we do educational software. Most of it's focused on STEM subjects, which is important. But I've always thought we're missing something. The arts get cut first in schools, treated like they're expendable. But they're not. They're how we make sense of the world." "That's a surprisingly philosophical take from a tech CEO," Maggie said. "I'm full of surprises." His smile faded slightly. "My mom was a high school art teacher. After she died, her classroom was the first place I went. Just sat there, surrounded by student paintings and half-finished projects. It was like she was still there, somehow. Art does that. It outlives us." Maggie felt a pang of recognition. "I'm sorry about your mother. It was a long time ago, but you don't really get over it, do you? You just learn to carry it differently." "No," Maggie agreed quietly. "You don't get over it." They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who understood that some losses never fully heal. They just become part of who you are. "What was your favorite thing to paint?" Ethan asked after a while. "Before you stopped." Maggie hadn't thought about this in so long. "Water, rivers, oceans, rain. I loved trying to capture something that's always moving, always changing. Ryan used to joke that our apartment looked like we lived in an aquarium." "That sounds beautiful." It was. The past tense hurt. I sold most of them when I moved. Needed the space, needed the money. Kept a few in storage, but I haven't looked at them. Too painful. Too much like visiting a grave," Maggie admitted. "It's easier to just not." Ethan nodded, not pushing, not trying to fix her. They finished their coffee as morning light filtered through the courtyard, warming the stones beneath their feet. "I should get back," Maggie said finally, glancing at her watch. Her break was over 5 minutes ago. Mrs. Carrington will have my head if I'm late. The terrifying Mrs. Carrington, Ethan said with exaggerated dread. Does she sleep in a coffin? Maggie laughed. Actually laughed. I'm not supposed to speculate about that. Probably wise. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. It was becoming a habit, this small gesture of courtesy. Same time tomorrow. You're bribing me with expensive coffee, Maggie accused, but there was warmth in her voice. Is it working? She smiled despite herself. Maybe. As she walked back into the hotel, Maggie realized something had shifted. For the first time in 2 years, she'd spent 15 minutes not thinking about everything she'd lost. She'd just been present, talking to someone who seemed to genuinely enjoy her company. It was terrifying. It was also, in a way she couldn't quite name yet, wonderful. The package appeared in Maggie's locker on a Friday morning, wrapped in simple brown paper with her name written across the front in careful handwriting. She stared at it, confused. No one left things in employee lockers. Rosa occasionally shared leftover food from her family dinners, but she always handed it directly to Maggie. This was different, deliberate, anonymous, waiting. You gonna open it, or just stare at it all day? Rosa appeared beside her, already in her uniform, eyebrows raised with curiosity. I don't know who it's from, Maggie said. Well, there's one way to find out, Mija. Rosa patted her shoulder and headed toward the supply room, leaving Maggie alone with the mysterious package. Her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped it. Inside was a box, expensive, the kind from an art supply store in Manhattan that she used to visit when she and Ryan were newlyweds. When money was tight but dreams were abundant. Her breath caught. She lifted the lid. A sketchbook lay on top, its cover made of rich, textured paper. Beneath it, nestled in tissue paper, was a set of professional watercolor brushes, not the cheap kind from craft stores, but the real ones, handmade with sable hair, the kind she'd always admired but never been able to justify buying. There were tubes of paint, too, Winsor & Newton, professional grade. At the bottom of the box was a card, small and cream-colored. Her fingers shook as she opened it. And for the artist who forgot, she still is one. Maggie sat down hard on the wooden bench in front of the lockers, the box cradled in her lap. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Hot, unexpected, carrying 2 years of grief she'd been holding at arm's length. No one had seen her as an artist in so long. Not since Ryan died. Not since she'd become just another invisible worker in a uniform, cleaning up after other people's lives. She'd forgotten that version of herself existed, had buried it so deep she thought it was gone forever. But Ethan had seen it. After one conversation about watercolors and teaching, he'd seen her. Maggie! Rosa's voice came from behind her. Dios mío, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Maggie managed, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. Someone just gave me a gift. Rosa sat beside her, peering into the box. Her eyes widened. That's expensive. Who? Understanding dawned across her face. The penthouse guest. The nice one you keep running into. Maggie nodded, unable to speak. He likes you, Rosa said matter-of-factly. It's not like that, Maggie protested. He's just being kind. Men don't spend hundreds of dollars on art supplies for women they're just being kind to. Rosa's expression was knowing. He sees something in you, Mija. The question is, do you see it too? Maggie looked down at the brushes, at the pristine sketchbook waiting to be filled. I don't know if I remember how. To paint, Rosa asked gently, or to let someone care about you. The question hit too close to home. Maggie closed the box carefully, reverently. I need to thank him. Then go. Rosa glanced at the clock on the wall. You've got 10 minutes before shift starts. Penthouse suite is probably still on your route anyway. Maggie stood, clutching the box to her chest like a lifeline. Her heart hammered as she made her way to the elevator, rode it to the 15th floor, walked down the plush hallway to the penthouse door. She knocked 3 times, the standard protocol forgotten in her urgency. Ethan opened the door almost immediately, still in pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair sticking up in directions that would have been comical if she weren't so emotional. Maggie, he said, surprise and pleasure evident in his voice. I wasn't expecting. Why did you do this? The words tumbled out before she could organize them properly. She held up the box. This is too much. I can't accept. Yes, you can, Ethan said firmly, but gently. And you should. You don't even know me. I know enough. He leaned against the doorframe, his expression earnest. I know you're talented and kind. I know you gave up something you loved because life dealt you an impossible hand. I know that when you talk about painting, you become someone different, someone lighter, someone who remembers what joy feels like. Maggie's throat tightened. I haven't painted in 2 years. What if I can't anymore? What if that part of me really is gone? Then the supplies sit in your apartment unused, and I'm out a few $100s. Ethan shrugged. But what if you can? What if there's still an artist inside you, just waiting for permission to try again? I don't know what to say. Say you'll try, he urged. That's all. Just try. One painting, one sketch. Whatever feels right. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But at least you'll know. Maggie looked down at the box in her hands, at this tangible representation of someone believing in her when she'd stopped believing in herself. Thank you, she whispered. This is the kindest thing anyone's done for me in a very long time. You deserve kindness, Maggie. Ethan's voice was soft but certain. I wish you could see yourself the way I see you. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something fragile and new and terrifying. Maggie felt it in her chest, a flutter of feeling she thought had died with Ryan. That night, Maggie sat on the floor of her tiny studio apartment, the art supplies spread before her like an offering. The sketchbook lay open to its first pristine page, intimidating in its blankness. Her hand hovered over the brushes, fingers trembling with something between anticipation and fear. She hadn't touched art supplies since 3 days after Ryan's funeral, when she'd tried to paint and ended up sobbing so hard she'd vomited. After that, she'd packed everything away, told herself it was temporary, that she'd return to it when the grief wasn't so raw. 2 years later, the grief was still raw. It had just learned to hide better. Maggie picked up one of the brushes, a round sable, perfect for washes and detail work. The weight of it felt familiar, like greeting an old friend after a long absence. She filled a jar with water, squeezed paint onto an old plate she'd designated as her palette. Cerulean blue, Prussian blue, a touch of burnt sienna, water. She'd always painted water. The brush touched paper, and muscle memory took over. She didn't think, didn't plan, just moved the brush in fluid strokes, watching colors blend and separate, watching something emerge from nothing. It wasn't good. She was rusty, out of practice, her hand uncertain, but it was something. It was creation. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she worked, but they were different from the tears she'd cried 2 years ago. These weren't tears of loss alone, but something more complex. Grief, yes, but also relief, recognition, the feeling of finding a part of herself she'd thought was gone forever. She painted until her water jar turned muddy, until her eyes burned with exhaustion. When she finally set down the brush, she had created something abstract, flowing blues and greens, shapes that suggested water without defining it, movement captured in stillness. It wasn't her best work, but it was hers, and she had made it. Rather, the next morning, Maggie arrived at work feeling different, lighter, somehow, as if painting had released some pressure valve inside her chest. She caught herself humming as she prepared her cart, a habit she hadn't indulged in since Ryan died. Someone's in a good mood, Rosa observed, smiling knowingly. You used the supplies. I did, Maggie admitted. It was harder than I expected, but also easier in a strange way. The heart knows what it needs, Rosa said. Sometimes it just takes time to listen. Maggie was assigned to the 15th floor again. Mrs. Carrington had been giving her the premium floors more often lately. Maggie suspected it was punishment disguised as privilege, forcing her into more opportunities to make mistakes in high-stakes environments. But today, she didn't care. Today, she had something to look forward to. She knocked on the penthouse door, her heart beating faster than usual. When Ethan opened it, he was dressed for business, a navy suit, crisp white shirt, his hair finely tamed, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. Maggie. Good morning. Good morning. She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. Can I show you something? Of course. She'd taken a photo of her painting before leaving for work, a spontaneous decision, half hoping she'd have this opportunity. She handed him the phone. Ethan studied the image carefully, zooming in, taking his time. Maggie, this is beautiful. The way you captured movement, it feels alive. It's not very good, she said reflexively, the old self-criticism automatic. I'm out of practice, and the composition is all wrong. Stop, Ethan interrupted gently. Don't diminish what you created. You made something from nothing. That's not very good. That's courage. Maggie blinked, surprised by the emotion in his voice. It's just a painting. It's not just anything. He handed back her phone, his fingers brushing hers briefly. You faced something that scared you, and you did it anyway. That matters. They stood in the doorway, the morning light streaming through the penthouse windows behind him, and Maggie felt that flutter again, that dangerous, terrifying, wonderful feeling of connection. I wanted to ask you something, Ethan said, his expression suddenly uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. And please, feel absolutely free to say no. But I'm leaving the hotel next week, heading back to San Francisco for work. Before I go, I'd really like to take you to dinner. Somewhere nice. My way of saying thank you. Thank you for what? Maggie asked, genuinely confused. For reminding me why I do what I do, Ethan said. I've spent the last 5 years building a company, working 80-hour weeks, convincing myself that success was the same thing as meaning. But talking with you, you've reminded me that there's more to life than quarterly earnings and board meetings. That art matters, that people matter, that seeing someone matters. Maggie's breath caught. Ethan, I'm just a housekeeper. You're an artist who's survived something unimaginable, he corrected. You're someone who gets up every day and does hard work with dignity, even when people treat you terribly. You're someone who loved deeply enough that the loss nearly destroyed you, and you're still here, still trying. Don't diminish yourself like that. Not to me. The vulnerability in his words cracked something open inside her. Dinner, she said quietly. Just dinner. Just dinner, he promised. No expectations, no pressure. Just two people who've enjoyed talking to each other, having a meal together before I leave town. She should say no, should maintain the boundaries that kept her safe. But Rose's words echoed in her mind. The heart knows what it needs. Okay, Maggie heard herself say. Yes, I'd like that. The smile that spread across Ethan's face was worth every ounce of fear. Maggie stood in front of her closet, if the narrow space in her studio apartment could be called that, staring at the meager selection of clothes hanging before her. Nothing seemed right for dinner with a billionaire. Everything was too casual, too worn, too much a reminder of the life she'd been living for the past 2 years. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, Jennifer. So you're really doing this? Going to dinner with Mr. Penthouse? Maggie had made the mistake of mentioning the dinner during their weekly call. Jennifer had been cautiously supportive, though Maggie could hear the worry beneath her enthusiasm. Don't get hurt, her sister had said. Just be careful. Yes, in 2 hours, and I have nothing to wear, Maggie typed back. Wear the blue dress, the one from Ryan's cousin's wedding. You look beautiful in it. Maggie pulled the dress from the back of the closet. Navy blue, simple but elegant, purchased during a time when she and Ryan had been happy, planning for a future that would never come. She held it against herself, looking in the small mirror propped against the wall. Could she do this? Could she let herself feel something again? And the restaurant Ethan had chosen was in Tribeca, understated elegance, the kind of place where reservations were made months in advance. Maggie felt profoundly out of place as she gave Ethan's name to the host, acutely aware of the other diners in their designer clothes and expensive jewelry. Then she saw him, standing as she approached the table, and everything else faded into background noise. Ethan wore a dark suit without a tie, the top button of his shirt undone in a way that made him look both sophisticated and approachable. But it was his expression that took her breath away, the way his face lit up when he saw her, like she was the only person in the room. Maggie, he said softly, you look incredible. Thank you. She sat down, her hands fidgeting with her clutch, a borrowed accessory from Jennifer. This place is... Wow. Too much? Ethan asked, concern flickering across his face. I wanted somewhere special, but if you're uncomfortable... No, it's perfect, she assured him, and meant it. I'm just not used to this. Neither am I, actually, Ethan admitted. I mean, I eat at places like this for business all the time, but it always feels performative. This is different. This is... He paused, searching for words. This matters more. The waiter appeared, and Ethan ordered wine, something French that Maggie couldn't pronounce, and they settled into the strange intimacy of a first date that didn't quite feel like a first date, because they'd already shared so much. Tell me something, Ethan said once their glasses were filled. Something I don't know yet. Something real. Maggie took a sip of wine, gathering courage. Sometimes I forget what Ryan's voice sounded like. I have recordings, voicemails I've saved, but it's not the same as remembering naturally, and that terrifies me. Like if I forget his voice, I'm losing him all over again. Ethan reached across the table, his hand covering hers. That doesn't mean you're forgetting him. It means you're human. Memory works that way. It shifts, changes, but love doesn't. What you felt for him, what you shared, that's permanent. How do you know? Maggie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I see how you talk about him, Ethan said. There's no past tense in your love, just in his presence. Tears pricked her eyes. I didn't think I'd ever feel ready to have dinner with someone, to sit here like this and not feel guilty. Do you feel guilty? Maggie considered the question honestly. A little, but also, Ryan wouldn't want me to stop living. He was always pushing me to try new things, meet people, say yes to opportunities. He'd probably be thrilled I'm here, even if he'd give you the intimidating husband talk first. Ethan smiled. I would have welcomed that talk. Your turn. Ask me something. Why are you really here? Maggie asked. In New York, staying at a hotel for weeks. You could work from anywhere. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his thumb unconsciously tracing patterns on the stem of his wine glass. I was running away, he said finally. My company just went through a major acquisition negotiation. It fell through at the last minute. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Gone. Everyone kept telling me it was fine, that there would be other opportunities, but I felt like I'd failed. So I left San Francisco, told my team I needed to handle some East Coast investor meetings, and just escaped. Did it work? The escape? Not until I met you, Ethan said. You made me remember why any of it matters, why I started the company in the first place. It wasn't about the money or the success. It was about creating something meaningful, something that helps people. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. And a housekeeper reminded you, Maggie said with gentle skepticism. An artist reminded me, Ethan corrected. Someone who creates beauty, even when the world has given her every reason not to. Someone who shows up every day with grace, even when people treat her like she's invisible. That's not nothing, Maggie. That's everything. The waiter arrived with their appetizers, but Maggie barely noticed. She was lost in Ethan's eyes, in the impossible reality of this moment, this connection that shouldn't exist but did. After dinner, Ethan suggested a walk through Central Park. The evening air was cool, carrying the last whispers of autumn, and the park glowed under strategically placed lights that made the pathways feel like something from a dream. They walked side by side, their hands occasionally brushing, accidental touches that felt increasingly deliberate. Maggie was hyper-aware of his presence beside her, of the way her heart raced when he looked at her, of the dangerous hope unfurling in her chest. I have a confession, Ethan said as they approached Bow Bridge, its graceful arch reflected in the water below. The coffee meetings weren't coincidental. I was absolutely tracking your break schedule. Maggie laughed, surprised by his honesty. I suspected as much. Rosa called you out after the second week. Smart woman. Rosa. He paused at the center of the bridge, leaning against the railing. I couldn't help myself. Every conversation with you was the best part of my day, even when I was complaining about Mrs. Carrington. Especially then, Ethan said with a grin. You have this way of describing things, like when you called her a woman whose soul left her body years ago and forgot to tell her face. I said that out loud. Maggie covered her face with her hands, mortified. You did. It was brilliant. Ethan gently pulled her hands down, his expression growing serious. Maggie, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. Her stomach tightened with sudden anxiety. Okay, I'm going back to San Francisco on Monday, he said. My flight's already booked, but I don't want us, to end just because I'm leaving New York. Ethan, she started, but he continued. I know what you're thinking, that we live in different worlds, that the distance is impossible, that I'm some rich guy who'll forget about you the moment I board the plane. His voice was raw, vulnerable, but I won't. I can't. You've become too important to me. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs. We've known each other 3 weeks. I know. It's crazy. It's too fast. Ethan stepped closer, his hands finding hers. But sometimes the most important things happen quickly. My mother used to say that the universe doesn't always give you time to be cautious. Sometimes you just have to trust what you feel. I'm scared, Maggie whispered. The admission cost her, but it was true. I loved Ryan with everything I had, and losing him nearly destroyed me. I don't know if I'm strong enough to risk that kind of pain again. I'm scared too, Ethan admitted. I've spent 5 years married to my work, convincing myself that caring too much about anything else was a liability. Then you walked into my life, this beautiful, resilient, impossible woman, and suddenly, everything I thought I knew feels wrong. A jogger passed by, their footsteps echoing on the bridge before fading into the distance. The city hummed around them, millions of people living their separate lives. But in this moment, only the two of them existed. What are you asking me? Maggie said finally. I'm asking you to take a chance, Ethan said. I'll come back to New York as often as I can. We'll video call every day if you want. I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Together. I just need to know if you feel this too, or if I'm alone in it. Maggie looked up at him, at this man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had believed in her when she'd stopped believing in herself, who had somehow slipped past every defense she'd carefully constructed. I feel it, she breathed. God help me. I feel it too. The relief that flooded Ethan's face was profound. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks with heartbreaking tenderness. Can I kiss you? She nodded, unable to speak. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first. A question, a promise, a beginning. Maggie felt something break open inside her, not painfully, but like a dam releasing water that had been held back too long. She kissed him back, her hands finding the lapels of his jacket, anchoring herself to this moment, this impossible, terrifying, wonderful moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I see you, Maggie Brooks. I've seen you since that first night, and I'm not going anywhere. Even 3,000 miles away, she asked, trying to lighten the intensity. Especially 3,000 miles away, he promised. Distance is just geography. This, he placed his hand over his heart, then over hers. This is real. They stood on Bow Bridge as the park settled into its nighttime rhythm. Two broken people who had somehow found something whole in each other. The future was uncertain. The obstacles were real. But for the first time in 2 years, Maggie felt something she'd forgotten was possible. She felt hope. 3 months later, Maggie stood in front of an easel in her apartment, no longer the cramped studio in Queens, but a one-bedroom in Brooklyn with actual windows that let in real light. The space smelled of paint and possibility. On the canvas before her, water flowed in shades of blue and green, but this time, there was something else. Light breaking through, golden and warm, transforming the darkness into something beautiful. It wasn't just water anymore. It was hope made visible. Her phone buzzed with a video call. Ethan's face appeared on the screen, slightly pixelated but smiling. Show me, he said, and she could hear the anticipation in his voice. Maggie turned the phone toward the canvas. Even through the screen, she could see his expression shift. Pride, wonder, something deeper that made her chest ache in the best way. Maggie, that's extraordinary, he breathed. You're not just painting again. You're evolving. I have a good muse, she said, turning the camera back to herself, though he's annoyingly far away. 2 more days, Ethan promised. My flight lands Friday at 6, and this time, I'm staying for 2 weeks. They'd been doing this dance for 3 months. Video calls every evening, texts throughout the day, stolen weekends when Ethan could fly to New York or Maggie could take time off to visit San Francisco. It was hard, the distance, but it was also working. Somehow, impossibly, it was working. The morning after their kiss in Central Park, Ethan had done something Maggie still couldn't quite believe. He'd gone to the hotel management, not Mrs. Carrington, but her superior, and made a substantial donation to establish a fund for employee education and development. The first recipient had been Maggie herself, a grant that allowed her to leave housekeeping and enroll part-time in an art education program at NYU while working at a gallery in Chelsea. Mrs. Carrington had been furious, of course, but there was nothing she could do. Maggie had left the Lexington Grand with her head held high, Rosa cheering as she turned in her uniform for the last time. How's the gallery? Ethan asked, pulling her back to the present. Good. Challenging, Maggie smiled. The owner asked if I wanted to display some of my work in the Emerging Artists Showcase next month. Maggie, that's incredible. Ethan's excitement was genuine, unguarded. Are you going to do it? I'm terrified, she admitted. But yes, I'm going to do it. I'll be there. Front row. embarrassingly proud. You don't have to. I want to. Ethan interrupted gently. I want to be there for every important moment. The big ones and the small ones. That's what this is, isn't it? That's what we're building. Maggie felt tears prick her eyes. Happy tears. The kind she'd forgotten existed. When did you get so wise? I learned from an artist who taught me that breaking isn't the same as being broken, Ethan said softly. That you can survive impossible loss and still create beauty. That love doesn't end just because someone leaves. It changes form, but it stays. She understood what he wasn't saying directly, that loving him didn't erase Ryan, that her heart was big enough to hold both grief and joy, memory and hope, yesterday and tomorrow. I love you, Maggie said. The words came easier now, though they still carried weight. I didn't think I'd ever say that to anyone again. I love you too, Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for taking the chance, for letting me see you. After they hung up, Maggie returned to her painting. She added more light, more gold, watching as the water transformed under her brush. This was her symbol, she realized. Water that moved, changed, carried loss and light in equal measure. Water that kept flowing, no matter what. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Rosa. Dinner Sunday. I want to hear everything about Mr. Penthouse's visit. And I'm bringing empanadas. Maggie smiled, typing back a quick yes. Her life had become fuller than she'd imagined possible. Friends, art, love, purpose. Not the life she'd planned with Ryan, but a life nonetheless. A good life, one he would have wanted for her. She picked up her brush again, adding a final stroke of golden light breaking through the blue. In the corner of the canvas, she signed her name. Not just Maggie Brooks, but the full signature she hadn't used in years. Margaret Brooks, artist. The woman who had forgotten she existed was finally, beautifully, unmistakably alive again. Outside her window, Brooklyn hummed with evening energy. Somewhere, a couple laughed. A child called for their mother. Life continued its messy, beautiful, impossible dance. And Maggie, for the first time in years, was ready to dance with it. Did you like this story? Would you have done anything differently? Tell me in the comments. See you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe now to receive more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. Thank you very much.